Hello, everybody, again. Yes, I'm so happy to be back once more, as promised, with a review of William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. Before I get into the book itself, a little bit on my history with William Faulkner. About 4 years ago, I started getting more heavily into the modernists. I started reading my first couple of essays of Virginia Woolf. I started reading snippets of James Joyce's Dubliners, and I had begun on W.B. Yeats's poetry, W.H. Auden's poetry, Dylan Thomas's poetry. I mean, I was really getting into the more challenging side of early 20th century reading, and I was loving it so much. I wanted to have the most difficult books. I wanted to get the hardest books in English and try to tackle them. I wanted the challenge. It had been a while since I had been really challenged by my reading, and I was enjoying actually finding a little bit of difficulty with sentences again, having to look up a lot of words and see how having to reread paragraphs and reread phrases to see what exactly was being said. I loved that. I loved it so much. So my parents went on, because I couldn't stop talking about it, and they found a list of the top 10 most difficult books in the English language. On the top of the list were, at number 2, William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury, and at number 1, James Joyce's Finnegans Wake. They got me both, and The Sound and the Fury came in a set of 3 novels. It came with As I Lay Dying. See, they're of the vintage international paperback editions. They come together, and in thirds, this set in thirds completes, here we go, William Faulkner's face. It's kind of fun, and this set of 3 had As I Lay Dying, The Sound and the Fury, and Light in August. I read As I Lay Dying first, not because it's the shortest of those 3. I mean, as you all know, if those of you who have watched my Big Books tag video know, I am not intimidated by big books. I love big books. I love reading. I don't care how big the book is. I want to read it if it's interesting to me. And this thing was, I hope to reread it at least 100 times before I'm dead. I'm enamored of this book. Everything seems to work. The harmony between prose, character, subject, or should I say, theme, and I mean, everything just seems to work so well in this book. If you haven't read this, I suggest picking it up. Faulkner has, again, as I have intimated, a reputation for being a difficult writer. And you can see by my expression that I was disappointed by what I found in The Sound and the Fury. Again, I am hinting at a reason why, being that I did not find it as complex as I had hoped. This book here is not hard, it's not intimidating, nothing like that. It is beautiful. This is a beautiful book, and you need to read it. I mean, it's the only Faulkner novel I like, I will say it that way. And I like it so very, very much. You could say I do love this one novel. So it came as a surprise to me that this one wound up being such a disappointment. A terrible, terrible, terrible disappointment. How do I feel about this? The attempt to find the word. Do I abhor it, despise it, hate it, wish to burn it? Yes. And I would have burned it at my kitchen sink if I hadn't thought twice due to the fear of the ensuing conflagration, uh, and then also out of remorse over the trees that died and were recycled and recycled and recycled until in some fraction they became this thing. That is the only thing that saved this. Okay, so a little bit about The Sound and the Furies history. It was published in 1929. It was an experiment by Faulkner. It very much seems to me, and it has been, I think, pretty much agreed upon by critics, that it was an attempt by him to approach the achievements of the great European authors of the same era. All the experimentation that was going on at that time, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, the poets, Auden, Thomas, etc. Everybody was trying to do something to make English prose somewhat new, or at least somewhat more. That's really it. They were trying to make it more. And Faulkner decided to get in on this trend, and this was published before Finnegans Wake. So that is a little bit important. It is the only thing in the entire book. The reason that is important is the only thing in the entire book that Faulkner did not, I have to just say it, he didn't flat out copy. Okay. Finnegans Wake has a circular structure. You begin at the end and the beginning, and then you wind up back at the end and the beginning. It's quite something. It's nonlinear, and that's basically it. You go from one point and you come back to that point at the end of the book. The same thing happens in a particular section of this novel. Okay, so the experiments that Faulkner tried with this thing, all of them were done by James Joyce, and I would say perfected by James Joyce. He used extreme stream of consciousness. I suppose you could say it was, the section that I've already mentioned contains no punctuation, much like the final section of James Joyce's Ulysses. And Faulkner makes sure that you know exactly who he's emulating. In one part, in said section, in this book, there is a character who exclaims, "Yes, yes, yes, yes." There's just... Which, I will say, I read Ulysses well after reading this. So, having read it, and then gone back to the memories of my experience with this thing, I was even more put off by this novel. Alright, I opened it for the first time. It starts in the mind of a character who has very little awareness of, or at least I should say very little understanding of his own emotions. He knows how physically he feels when he is hurt or when he is affected by something that someone else is saying to him, or by something somebody is doing in front of him, that he sees as in opposition to his particular moral principles. He does not speak. He cries a lot. It's boring. Faulkner clearly intended this character as a distant perspective on the family that this novel concerns. Every Faulkner novel contains a fallen family. That is, as far as I can tell, at least the ones I have read, and Absalom, which I know a bit about, but may or may not ever actually sit down to read. I don't know. Not after all of this. They all include fallen families. And that's a major theme of Faulkner. He takes all kinds of characters, and he tears them apart, and he wants them to reach rock bottom, and then try to well, he brings them down to the point of absolute complacency, and that's kind of it. If you really want to look at it, most of his narrative, his personal narrative tropes and gimmicks, they do work sometimes. But I suppose, looking at The Sound of the Fury after seeing As I Lay Dying, as far as I can tell, this was kind of bound to, in one way or another, fail in certain books of his. This wasn't a formula that was necessarily foolproof. I could see that immediately upon reading As I Lay Dying. It's a very delicate formula, and if not handled well, it falls apart. And it becomes very melodramatic. It becomes very, indeed, I rarely say this about any of the modernists, any of the great aesthetic writers, but it becomes overdone, absolutely overdone. Usually Faulkner has a specific set of characters. One of them is educated. The others are, they range from just the bitter old patriarch or matriarch, the practical, highly practical, disillusioned and driven older sibling. There's always an oldest, usually a boy, who is trying to, in a way, pick up the pieces of the family, in a sense. And there's always the younger sister, a younger female character, who has a lot of complex feelings and a lot of tenacity. They're very tenacious, a lot of these young women. So there's a range of characters. In As I Lay Dying, that range is very clear. There are differences, real differences between each of the characters. There is uniqueness to be found in each narrative thread, and that is indeed what Faulkner uses, narrative threads, not conventional chapters, of course, because, again, he did try to be experimental. He was out for that. So, then comes The Sound and the Fury, with its characters all being practically of the same mind. I really don't see much of a difference between any of them. They just seem, each of them, a different end of one person. And that's not very, because of the way it is written. See, again, I don't care what you do. If you write it in a truly interesting and truly, in such a way that makes it clear that you knew how to handle your intentions. You have finished the book, piece, whatever it is, in such a way that I can finish it, and say, wow, you had a handle on that. You had a good handle on that. And it's actually quite impressive. You could, for one, hold that together. And then that I was engaged. And then that I was involved. And then that, hopefully, this is one of my favorite things that a great book does, that hopefully I was invaded. I love it when a book just invades me and it never leaves me. This book will go down in my personal history of experience with literature as a, indeed, very memorable book for the wrong reasons. Okay, we started with that character, as I said. A very, the distant character, we get to see the family going through. Great, fine. Faulkner can set that up if he wants to, but it was boring, absolutely boring. So I had high hopes for the next section. It's the section that made the novel, that made the novel's reputation, that I, from what I have seen, has continued to make Faulkner's reputation. Faulkner's entire reputation pretty much is built on this book. And that section that I've mentioned with no punctuation, told in stream of consciousness, is the signature. It involves a boy, a college-age boy who is at university. He has he's conflicted because of a certain violent occurrence that he was witness to. It concerned, I believe it was his sister, cousin or sister, I think sister, and she was being assaulted by another man. And of course, the narrative is designed so that you're not entirely clear on exactly what is happening. You don't get a direct statement in any way. It's meant to be somewhat hallucinatory. All of Faulkner's most educated characters in his novels are unhinged. They're designed to be the most complex, the most as far as I can tell, they're kind of designed in a way to get the reader into the book. They're designed to arrest the reader. That's what this guy is meant for. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It does not work. It did not work for me, not in any way at all. It seems to me that Faulkner was attempting to experiment and then just tried to throw in his usual tropes, his own usual signature tropes, which had worked for him in several books in the past, and which he decided, well, now he had a handle on enough to be able to twist and turn them in any way pretty much he wanted. Unfortunately, it seems that he didn't have quite a handle enough on the prose style he went for in order to get this, to make this very convincing, and to make it seem appropriate, absolutely appropriate to the experience. Nothing fits together. The prose does not fit the characters. The characters do not fit the general theme really all that well. There's I'm sorry, but I thought to myself, if I were to receive this, I used to be a book reviewer for onlinebookclub.org. If I were to receive a book like this, and I were to read it, to review it, and it was published independently by an author, and I had to review it for $5, I would say that it should go right back through the editing process. I would say this needs a further revision. You need to put this. I mean, there needs to be another draft. I think that there's something that you're working for here. I would tell this author, there's something you're working for here. I can see what you're trying to do, but it's not going very well. I'm not drawn in. I'm not engaged, and I would like to see some of the clumsier areas polished a bit. Say whatever you will about James Joyce. He did know what he was going for, and he did everything in his power to ensure that he actually created the effect he wanted. Yes, there are some parts of Ulysses that are written like a bad adult contemporary novella. There are parts that are written in very highly scholastic language. There are sections written in the style of, for instance, a kind of an epic of sorts, mixing Chaucer with Milton, with the multiple different authors of the Arthurian legends. There's a lot going on in Ulysses, but everything, for me, when I read Ulysses, I was nothing if not hypnotized. And I read it very quickly. I read the entire book very quickly because I couldn't put the dang thing down. This I read quickly for a very different reason. I only read books extremely fast for two reasons. Either I hate the book, or I love it so much I can't stop. I read this in an hour and a half. Once that section comes in with no punctuation, okay, it's an instant break, fine, okay, but you're taken into this situation, to this nonlinear story, a circular structure. It begins with the college student in his dorm room, and it ends with him walking in just a couple of seconds before. And I got to the very end. I got to it, and I thought to myself, it failed. It absolutely failed. And then the final section. The longest section in the book is dedicated to the pragmatist of the cast of characters. I think he's the oldest brother, and he only thinks about money, all these other things. There's this long stretch of narrative that is leading you up to him swindling a certain couple of people or whatever out of money. I cannot. I really, at the end of this, I went back and I thought to myself, okay, how much of the book can I remember? I remembered certain parts, certain little things, but really all I mostly could focus on was my absolute frustration with the execution. And I could not get past that. I couldn't get past it at all. I still can't really get past it. I can't remember a lot of the things that occurred in this novel, nor did I care to go back and try to make sure as to the exact goings on and whatnot. Would I, in a written piece, which I would like to at some point write a critical piece on Faulkner's fiction, for that I would go back, I would make sure of things and whatnot, because I want to treat all authors, even the ones that I can't stand, with equal critical respect. But just sitting here talking to all of you, sitting here trying to just get through my feelings on the book, I cannot. At this particular moment, even I went in this morning and I thought to myself, well, while I'm running around dusting and vacuuming and whatnot, I will just look on my phone. I'll go to the Wikipedia page of the novel, and I will try to find all the main plot points, put everything together and all that. I'll do that. I couldn't. I could not. I picked up the book for the second time, and again I wanted to go burn it in the sink. There are indeed so many things. I'm certainly not saying that there are not so many things to love about Faulkner. Faulkner was important for a reason. Do I think he deserved the Nobel Prize? No. And do I think that Henry James should have won before him instead? Oh yes. But I think we would have had a certain shift in the literary world. It may have been relatively marginal, but we would have had a certain shift in the literary world if Henry James had won the Nobel Prize, and I think it would have shifted things in a good direction. But as it happened, he didn't win the Nobel. Faulkner did. Later, years and years later, Faulkner won the Nobel Prize. Okay. So now, really, you do know. Okay, and again, as I said, it's not hard. This is not hard at all. There is no challenge. Nothing. Everything. Read the sentences a couple of times if you need to. Read a paragraph over if you really need to. I doubt that you will. This is not difficult. It is not in any way I wasn't forced to look at anything. I knew almost all of the references or the allusions he was making. The, I mean, it was just, on every level, this thing disappointed me so much. I, so, if you are, though, a fan of Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury, certainly more power to you. I would love, if any of you are, I would love for you to leave me a comment that really gives me your reasons why. And gush all you want. Do whatever you want. Apparently YouTube has a thing that, an algorithm that limits your word count to each of your comments. Otherwise, if you go over this particular word count, it winds up in my junk mail. Somewhere on YouTube, somewhere on the site, and I can't get to it. So if you have to put it into multiple comments or whatever, your explanation of why you love this thing, do so. I would love to see it. And if you love all of Faulkner, if you think he did deserve the Nobel Prize, all of that, give me that. Give me a reason why. I cannot see it through this book. This one is great. I love this book. This one is amazing. But it's not enough to really... It's not enough to get you the Nobel. It's not enough to... It would be enough for any novelist to stake his or her reputation on. But it's only one. This is only one of how many novels did Faulkner write? And short stories and all that. I mean, so there you have my thoughts on Faulkner. Immediately after finishing this video, who knows? I may just go in and I will keep it. You know what? I will keep it to try maybe sometime later to go back to it. Maybe later in my life I will find an appreciation for it. Perhaps. But it's just this entire... If you're going to copy James Joyce, if you're going to do it, if you're going to take some of his stuff, at least try to make it more of your own. Try to make it fit something, harmonize somehow. Don't just say, oh, well, he did that kind of thing. I could do that too. And I'm going to make it about what I want to make it about. And because I have these, but I'm not really going to try that hard to make it all work together, to really harmonize it all. It took Faulkner much less time to write this than it took Joyce to write Finnegans Wake. So I'm not really going to try too hard. I'm not going to put in everything I possibly can. I have my tropes, I have my stuff. What I'm really concerned about right now is just that thing I want to do, that experiment I want to do. Okay, so art for art's sake can work, but it has to be art. See, art requires harmony of ideas, or such a kind of disunity between them as becomes very interesting still to look at as a whole. There still has to be, I mean, you have to be able to take this thing as a whole, and this thing can, as far as I can tell, it can only really be taken apart in pieces, because and maybe I'm not explaining that very well. I really don't know how to explain it better than to say, you tear this book apart into little pieces the same way that you would a first draft of somebody else's book that they send to you over the mail just to review for them to try and get them a readership when they haven't put in all the work necessary to get that readership. They expect all of this fame and popularity from a first draft. That's what this felt like to me. Just a highly, I suppose you could say, a somewhat more sophisticated experimental first draft of a novel. I am not pleased. Not at all. But again, leave your comments below. And yes, if you love the book, if you love Faulkner in general, tell me why. I mean, I would love to talk about this. It's one of the reasons I decided to review this book before any others. And on this note, yes, Probably within the month or so, I have planned to do the unpopular opinions tag. So, um, I that will be also coming soon, and further reviews of books that I have loved and books I have hated. Those two will be coming soon. But for now, I thank you all for being here, and I look forward to talking with you all more in the comments later. And oh, well, I'm just so happy to be back. I really am so happy to be back. It was very difficult even for me to tear apart Faulkner in the way that maybe I would ordinarily, because I'm just so excited that everything's working again and I can be here talking to you all again. So have an amazing night. I hope all of your Victober is going well, and I will see you again tomorrow.